Poverty is not just the absence of money, but the absence of opportunity. And the United States is a country where you have both freedom and abundant opportunities. Moving to the United States has given me both. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knit family. I was the third of four children. And the best thing that my parents gave me was the gift of education. Even though I came from a poor family, they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. But what my parents did was that they instilled in us the value of faith, hard work, and not giving up. They made us realize that if you put in the work, you will definitely get the reward. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. I got my first job at the age of 14. My job was on a construction site. My duties were to move concrete on a large pan from one end of the construction site to another one. I worked on that day from around 6 in the morning to about 7 at night. At the end of the day, the employer refused to pay me. And the reason was because she did not authorize the foreman to hire me. So I worked from sunup to sundown and didn't get paid. That tore up my spirit. And from that moment on, I decided that I was going to become a lawyer. And I was going to use every ounce of strength within me to fight against injustice, regardless of how powerful the opponent is. I am a man that worked my way up from nothing. I know what it means to feel like you're being unfairly treated, and I'm the person that can stand up to opponents regardless of how big or how powerful they are. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Olawale. My guest today is someone I would describe as a triple, I can't even say triple threat because he's not a threat, but a, a triple champion. You know, she's a teacher, she's a lawyer, she's an author, and she's, well, more than three. She's a TikTok influencer. And welcome to the show, Jocelyn Stewart.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and I was just looking at some of the work you've done that people can find out there. You have three books called Shaping the Battlefield, and most of the three of them are about emotions. And this is the first one, Shaping the Battlefield, How to Litigate Motions in Military Practice. There's another one, How to Draft Motions in Military Practice. And then the latest one is Rule 412, Motions about Military Practice. Now, what inspired you? Can you, okay, before we start talking about your books, you know, a lot of people have never met you. I know who you are because I've seen your work and I've read your work, and I'm quite impressed. Who is Jocelyn Stewart to people out there who don't know who you are?
Sure. Thank you for that. I am an advocate, right, above all else. I served in the military for quite a while and then segued into private practice, where I now defend service members worldwide anytime that their liberty or their ability to stay in the military is at threat. So, whether it's a criminal case or whether it's an administrative one where the military may be trying to reprimand, maybe trying to fire them, maybe trying to push them out, not make their next rank, anything that could potentially jeopardize their future in the military is where myself and the team of amazing people that I've been able to assemble over the past 11 plus years in private practice. But I started off as an active duty Army judge advocate, and I served on active duty in that role from 2004 until late 2012 when I did start as a complete solo, when I hung out a shingle and began dedicating my life to just defense. For many years while I was on active duty, I was actually a military prosecutor in the Army. I prosecuted lots of different cases, some homicide cases, mostly focusing on sexual assault and child sexual trauma and child exploitation, including domestic violence and interpersonal, interpartner violence. So I've kind of done a lot, been blessed to be able to serve so many for so long.
Wow. Wow. That's so impressive. And what inspired you to join the military in the first place?
So my inspiration came actually from when I was around 15 years old. A woman from my hometown came to my school. She was at the time a cadet at the United States Military Academy at West Point. I was so impressed with her and her story. In fact, her dad was my dentist. I didn't even know she had gone on to the academy where she played tennis. And for me, so many things kind of came together that day. I even announced to my peers in my class, who all thought I was crazy, that I'm going there. It didn't appeal to anybody else. Everyone else thought, military lockdown, this is not what I want. But for me, I've always considered myself to be a very self-disciplined person. And the academy appeared to me like the ability to be able to culminate all of those worlds: academic challenges, physical rigors, and just that self-discipline of being in that kind of environment that would be so demanding.
Wow. So did you decide to become a soldier before you decide to become a lawyer? Which one comes first?
The law came first, for sure. So
Then, okay. What inspired you to decide to choose to go for law?
from a very early age, and I recall it actually at the age of 5, I told my family that I was going to be a judge. That was my initial segue. And kind of funnily enough, my dad had to explain to me, well, you don't just get to start off being a judge, you have to be a lawyer first. And I didn't believe him. I've always been very one of those kids. I probably drove them crazy, but I needed to have evidence. And so my dad provided evidence to me that it was true. I had to be a lawyer first before I could become a judge. I said, okay, fine, I'll be a lawyer first.
Oh, wow. And then after he presented that evidence to you, you followed through. So since the age of 5, you always knew that you wanted to become a lawyer.
Yes. And I think it wasn't until I was maybe 15 or 16 that I identified that I really felt drawn to trial law, and specifically criminal law. I honestly thought I would probably be a career prosecutor. When I took the Louisiana bar, when I was graduating from law school, because Louisiana sort of has a reputation, and probably deservedly in some regards, for nepotism, they require any applicant to take a fictitious name that becomes your name, so that there can't be this, because my dad actually was a bar examiner for a period of time. He was not a bar examiner the year I took the bar, but my name that I chose was Jack McCoy, who is the fictitious prosecutor, of course, from Law and Order. I watched a lot of Law and Order growing up, and I felt like that would be kind of my purpose.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Louisiana?
I did. I was born and raised in Southwest Louisiana, and left there after law school, and joined the military, and haven't really looked back.
Wow. What was it like to grow up in Louisiana?
In many ways, I felt like a stranger in a strange land. Where I grew up, I definitely had every kind of upper middle class privilege. I was raised by parents who were not from the South. My parents are from Pennsylvania. And it became very crystallized and to me, pretty early on, that there were a lot of people who did not share sort of a love of diversity, and the idea that opportunity should be for just not the rich. And they were pretty racist, to be blunt. And I remember, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade, and our teacher in that class, she had been raised in the North and Princeton trained, and very impressive. And we were discussing a book, As I Lay Dying. Of course, it has a cultural background of, racism, systemic racism. And one of the kids, one of the girls in my class said, well, of course, you know, Black people aren't as smart as white people. And I looked around and everyone's nodding. And I just, where am I? Like, what planet are we on? And the only person who connected with me in this sort of like, where are we, was this woman who'd been trained from Princeton. And so a lot of my life, I felt like I was not in the right place in terms of perspective and people's viewpoints in life. So I'm very, I was enriched by the culture of South Louisiana, the food, the music, the art. And so I take that with me, but it's not a place that I felt connected to. And I never felt like home there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. How did you navigate feeling like a fish out of water while you were growing up there?
I don't think I did it very well. I was very almost hostile to that vantage point. I felt very uncomfortable just sort of sitting back and being quiet. We're talking about, growing up in the 80s and 90s when people were not so open to open perspectives. And I didn't have very many friends. I begged and begged and begged growing up to be able to leave that environment. I wanted to go to a public school. Finally, my parents relented and allowed me to do that. So I transferred off of this tiny, tiny private school where I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the mechanics of writing, about how to learn, about how to study, and all of those things. But the gifts that I received in just being in a school where the question wasn't, where are you going to college? The question was, will you get to go to college? And I went from being the poor kid in a private school to being like rich because I had a car. But it helped me to connect and understand that like I had been living in a bubble, and I had some sense of that, but it didn't really concretize for me until I had the chance to get away from that environment. I remember one of my classmates ran into me. I'd gotten a job working at a local deli. I was saving up money for college and for whatever it is that I was going to try to do. And she came to me and said, I heard you have a job. What is that like? Just, you go to a place and you're responsible and they pay you minimum wage and you clean up after people and, so I don't think I did it very well. I just didn't connect with that. And so I think from an early age, I was excited to be able to do work where I was serving others. That's a big fundamental part of who I am and my faith, for sure.
Yeah, you have a soul of service, so you had to take yourself out of that place of comfort to be able to understand people that are not from the same walk of life as you. Yeah, which leads me to ask, even deciding to join the military after going to law school and becoming an attorney, how did your parents react to that?
So I did not really come from a lot of people who join the military, it's because their mom did or their dad did. I didn't have that in my background. If anything, I think my mom was definitely a self-identified hippie, was very uncomfortable. They grew up in a generation where, Vietnam service was frowned on and seen it as an unjust war and, everything. It was very divisive. And it was not something, I think they could be intellectually proud of the fact that I had gotten into West Point because it was so such a high, feather in the cap. They could be proud about that. But the reality of serving my country was, I tend to think was something that our community saw as kind of beneath me. People sort of even figured that it might be just my inroads to laying a foundation to start a political career. Like, oh, she's just going to serve for a couple of years so she can say she's a veteran and she's going to come back to Louisiana and she's going to do politics. I did not feel called to lead people who had such an enormously different vantage point from me. I think in a time when so few people volunteered to serve their country, especially from the social and economic strata that I had been accustomed and being raised in, it was something that was very confusing to a lot of people. One of my friends, I remember her saying, I don't understand your connection with the military. How can you go there? You're just going to be this robot, this person who can't think for yourself. And I said, actually, I have that in me. It's who I am, and what I do is to question, and who better than to go into a system where maybe hierarchy needs to be questioned, and have someone who's an instigator, and have someone who's a free thinker to sort of try to innovate and try to change and help shape things. And that was 100% where I felt connected in my service.
Thank you for your service. And then, after you joined the military as an attorney, you said most of the time you worked as a prosecutor, prosecuting sexual assault cases, domestic violence. What was that like?
Stressful, for sure. My first job in the courtroom was as a prosecutor for just over 2 years. I had some really big cases that I did not expect to get. They sort of fell into my lap, and others I had to fight, to stay on the team as such a junior person, and just had such deeply rich opportunities. I think I really have to, credit my superiors and my leadership for recognizing in me that the trial work was clearly something that I had a knack for. And so they were very encouraging. And for a time, I got to really stay in the courtroom. So then I switched over and I did 3 years consecutively of uniformed defense, right? So in the military, everyone is basically considered indigent, whereas in the civilian community, you have to fill out some paperwork, you have to show your pay stubs or lack of them to be able to qualify for indigent defense. Well, in the military, they start off with the proposition that everyone is entitled to appointed counsel. And so I did that for 3 years, 2 years in Germany, then 1 year in Germany, and then 2 years at Fort Hood, Texas, which was at the time, and that was from 2008 to 2010, the busiest court-martial jurisdiction in the world. We were trying and defending more cases there than anywhere else. It was a very busy docket for us. So, and then I switched back. I got the opportunity to do 2 more years in litigation, complex litigation, where I was specifically tasked to prosecute domestic violence and child sex abuse cases and sexual assault against women. And I did that for 2 years before I said no more. And I broke out on my own, I broke out on my own. So.
Do you have a preference between defending or prosecuting?
That's always an interesting question. I would say that there are aspects about each that I like, and other aspects about each that I don't. So I remember when I was interviewing for the job as adjunct professor of trial advocacy and criminal law at the Army's JAG School, they asked me sort of a similar question, like, how do you identify? Because in our culture in the military, people sort of call themselves, and maybe it's true for civilian defense too, but are you a Kool-Aid drinker, or are you a true believer in the sense of defense work? And I said, I'm neither. I said, I'm a mercenary. And they tried to prod me a little and say, which really, to your core, which really are you? And I said, no, I'm a mercenary. I said, you could hand me a case file and I think I could probably effectively prosecute or defend it. For me, it's always been about where can I have the most impact and where am I going to connect in that regard? And I feel like as a prosecutor, I had a huge impact in advising commanders about sort of the shoulds of the types of actions that they should take, and taking forward only cases that were truly righteous. And then as a defense attorney, especially now in private practice where I'm no longer just assigned cases, I have the ability to not only defend these cases that I'm tasked with telling the stories of these individuals, but I also am creating opportunities to have a bigger dialogue. On behalf of one client in particular, I valued that representation so much and him just so much as an American hero. And he said, I don't just want to point out why this particular investigation didn't get it right with me. I want to make things better. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is a blessing. I was like, have I got some information for you? Because we were talking about shaping the Army's policy at policy level in terms of sexual harassment an assault response prevention, their program. And we, through that representation, I wrote out several aspects of how I thought policy needed to change. And within 48 hours of submitting that to the FORCECOM commander for the military, for the Army, policy changed. And they adopted 2 of my proposals. So it's not just for me picking the cases where I can just save that one human, which obviously is a just and honorable thing to do. But for me, I'm trying to pick now projects that will have a greater impact, even at the policy level.
Project that will have greater impact, even on the policy level. And the diversity of your experience, it's really reflected in these books, because the way you wrote those books is not just on the defense side. You also wrote about what the prosecutor would do with some of these motions. It's like you have you're like the 2 sides to the coin. Even though, because you work as a prosecutor, because you also work now as a defense counsel, you understand both sides of those opposing coins.
Absolutely. For me, kind of what drove me to those projects at all was sort of the recognition that there was a deficiency in training. I very much feel like if I'm someone who's going to be an instigator and pointing out that there is a deficiency, I also need to flip that on its head, and I need to be part of fixing it. So I can't sit here and complain that counsel aren't writing motions effectively or litigating them well if I haven't been a part of it. And I was shocked when I looked around and I saw that there really hadn't been a meaningful text or anybody who's approached it from the side. And for me, it was very intellectually stimulating, because intuitively, I think as attorneys, we come to be able to do certain tasks, but it's next level to be able to reflect on it, to sit with it, and to say, okay, what is my process? How do I do this? Because I think that if I can then have a generation of advocates who can now do it better than I did starting off, then that's going to be my legacy, right? It's not going to be the big cases, the flashy headlines. It's going to be growing the next generation of people, because I've taken on this philosophy of you can't take it with you. That doesn't just apply to money. That implies that's our experience and our knowledge and our wisdom. And so that's why I started the Shaping the Battlefield series. At least I'm done now writing on motions, and I've got 12 that I'll end up writing as part of the series. The next one I've already outlined and started writing, but because it's about jury instructions and voir dire, because I think that as counsel, we need to approach them at the same time, because they're sort of bookends of our experience. And people don't often think about instructions until the last minute. And so I'm trying to get counsel to be more forward leaning. But I'm very excited that I'm going to be able to take a break from some of the how-to stimulate myself in a different way, and to try to really share my story and also the stories of the kind of the biggest cases that have shaped my practice.
Thank you. And before we start talking about Shaping the Battlefield and the series, let's watch a short video.
Most people who tend to be drawn to the military in general have this sort of faith in the system. When the police tell them, we're here to help you, they trust in that. Our firm specializes in participating in those investigations. For any allegation, it's important your side, and only your side, is the one that's told. From the very beginning, I had a hand in military justice. I was chosen early on to be a part-time magistrate. After that, I transitioned into prosecution. Then I also defended for 3 years in uniform. So I have a perspective from having done both sides, having served in all of those roles, being able to anticipate what's coming from the government. When I was on the faculty of the JAG school teaching criminal law and advocacy, I identified what are some of those best practices that I saw and used in uniform doing it myself. I valued my service, and I value the service of everyone out there, and it means the most to me that they get the very best.
When a client comes to us, they feel like a target. People in their unit, sometimes close friends, sometimes family members, are now viewing them through a different lens. Perhaps their entire career is on the line, or their liberty. Our mission at the Law Office of Jocelyn Stewart is to provide an unapologetic defense. When the command is about to kick you in the teeth, you need someone who's going to punch back. You need someone who understands the service and the culture. We get it, and we care.
At the law office of Jocelyn Stewart, everybody wants to use their expertise to help service members be in their corner and be fighting for them so that they can focus on their family and continue with their roles and responsibilities as a service member.
There is nothing that describes how hard it is to go through having your entire world turned upside down from an accusation. One of the important things that we do is we help guide our clients through that because we're looking past whatever this is to help them get back on track to their future. The reason people hire us is because something important is at stake. It may be their career, it may be their whole future, and no one's going to fight harder for them than we will. There are 1 million people in uniform today doing great things for this country. Sometimes things happen and they need help. We are the people they should call.
Our clients are going through the hardest time of their life. They could be facing something all the way up to life without parole. And so they're looking for a calm in that storm. We know this process unlike anyone else. Anyone who has an appreciation of the culture within the military, which is essentially a zero defect, we reinforce for them that they're not alone, to take up this battle with and for them and alongside of them. We have walked the path of every single person that we mean to serve. Having served ourselves and respecting the service of others puts us in that unique position to know you, to understand you, in order to be the best for you.
Wow. What a powerful testimony.
Thank you.
And, yes. What inspired you to start your own practice?
So I think it was a culmination of factors. I saw that the military really was not reinforcing the ability for a person like me to stay in litigation. Overtly, they were telling me I had to get out of the courtroom or I would not progress. I was being told that I had been identified as someone that they wanted to develop into even growing into becoming a general officer. And in order for me to do that, they said, we have to get you out of the courtroom. We need you to generalize. You're this criminal law specialist, but that's not where we see your future. I even asked if I could stay and teach evidence at the Army's JAG school because I feel like that's such the meat and the potatoes of what we do. And there's this elegant way that the rules work. And I felt very inspired to inspire others to that sort of love of the law and how it works in this beautiful system that we have. And I was told I was overqualified and they would never give me that job. So it was like, okay, and it was hard because I never pictured myself getting out before, they required me when I'm, 35 years of service. I felt so drawn to and just inspired by my own service. I just didn't imagine my life without it. And so I really had to mourn that as I got out and I started to look around and say, okay, where am I going to put my energy? Because I'm being told that, it's not being valued in this way. I called a colleague who I had tried a case against. He was in civilian practice for a few years ahead of me. And I just said, hey, do you think I will be able to put food on the table if I hang out a shingle and if I try this work? Is there enough work out there? Like, will I be able to survive? And he said, have I got a deal for you? And so for that first year, I became of counsel to his firm, and he fed me a steady stream of leads, and I converted them. And then after a year, I left that sort of nest of comfort to really break out on my own, because it was a decision point too of, okay, am I going to double down? Am I going to really make this as an entrepreneur? Or am I going to find the safe job working on an Army base as a GS, civilian employee? And I opted for, door number one, to really be my own boss. And I'll tell you, that was probably the biggest surprise, was this love of marketing and this connection to, because for me, it was just advocacy on a different plane, right? So I was used to being able to stand up in front of a jury and to advocate a position and to sort of sell my message and my theme in that way. Writing a website and blogging and doing the videos and doing all of the things that help people to become drawn to me without ever meeting me was something I did not expect to enjoy in the way that I do. I really love it. And it wasn't something I never took a business class in college. It just wasn't something that had occurred to me that I would ever have to do. And so I became self-taught. I watched kind of every YouTube video you could imagine, made some really, I think, good, important decisions about who to partner with and who would represent me. They were young, hungry, kind of starting off entrepreneurs who I screened and felt connected to and found early, and really felt like I bet on the right people early.
You adapted. Wow. Okay. And then you decided to write a book. I know you first started with the first series, with the first of the series, which is How to Drive Motions in Military Practice. But the main title of the book is Shaping the Battlefield. What inspired you to start writing in the first place?
So really it was to try to grow the next generation. I had, for many years, I had started to feel sort of a lack of fulfillment about what I call legal whack-a-mole, right? One case pops up, I can save that one person, right? I smash down that allegation and 5 more pop up, right? And the sense of like kind of coming to terms with my own humanity that I'm not going to be around forever. And I can only do so much as one person. I'm driving myself into the ground, trying to save the world. But I can do so much more if I can teach 100 people to do what I've done. And so it really was this sense of there's just so much and it can be overwhelming, but maybe I can do more in this way and feel less out of control and less small in a very giant system that is every day trying to mobilize and take away people's rights in very scary ways to me. But I want to create an army of people who can do what I do. I want to teach my way out of a job because fundamentally, I'm an entrepreneur. I've made money off of people's misery. And I also feel incredibly sad that, I have to benefit off of people's sadness. And so I also have kind of rededicated myself. I even started a nonprofit to trying to train uniformed defense counsel, because I feel strongly that if you serve your country, if you raise your hand in that way and are literally putting your life on the line, then the least that the government owes you is qualified counsel. And I blog about it a lot, and I write about it, and I talk about it, this idea that we should not have to buy justice. And it's a very sad truth that really ends up being the reality for many. And so if I can help more people to do what I've done, then people like me shouldn't have to exist, because they should just have people who are trained, effective litigators that they get as their appointed counsel. They shouldn't have to buy me or people like me.
Oh, thank you. You said something profound. You said you wanted to create an army of effective litigators, defenders. Wow, that's profound. And when you started writing Shaping the Battlefield, did you envisage that it's going to be a series, or did you just decide to write more after the first?
I do very few things without a plan. And this was definitely part of a plan. And that's why I defined the book in the way that I did, by saying Shaping the Battlefield, because there are so many things, the battlefield being our trials, right? There are things that we do in advance, there are things that we do during, that are going to all lead, hopefully, to that well-constructed battle plan and that victory. But it definitely was part of a plan. I've sketched out at least the topics for the next several books.
Oh, wow. And why the title Shaping the Battlefield? I know you explained it in the book. Can you tell the audience?
Right. Well, obviously, with a military context, that was definitely, a play on it, and I think could help identify with sort of the way we're going. I've heard so many counsel deal, especially with motions. Obviously, that was their first, group of books, but in sort of an after the fact manner. I was someone who filed a lot of motions as a prosecutor. I had a mentor who developed that idea in me of like, hey, you need to know what are you going to have in your arsenal? What are going to be your weapons as you're moving into the battle of trial? Motions aren't just for defense attorneys. Motions can be very highly effective for prosecutors. And I took that to heart, and I try to incorporate that into the lessons from my book, that I have won trials because of the motions practice ahead of time, because of rulings that I've gotten, because of either keeping evidence out, guaranteeing certain evidence is coming in to know that I'm going to have that available to me, but really shaping things, and most importantly, that counsel are doing things with intention and with purpose, and not sort of just falling into it because that's just the way it ended up, right? Being very forward focused in their mentality.
So what you're saying in essence is that if counsel files motions, they are more likely to shape the battlefield or to shape the direction of the trial or the case than just defending or just waiting with whichever side they fall on.
Absolutely. I think, having tried the number of cases that I've tried, nothing, what I always call those game time calls. I'm also a sports person, so I make analogies there, but like oftentimes the game time calls don't go to the defense, right? So you're helping your judge to help your side by briefing everything ahead of time and giving them all of the ammunition and the case law and the facts to be able to side with you. Because I just see the sort of gut reaction of, if your defense is trying to do something that the judge wasn't expecting, that game time call is going to be inclined to keep it out. And so if it's really important to your case, let's get ahead of it. Let's shape our battlefield. Let's make sure that we know in advance that we've given everything that we can, all the reasons and all the ammunition to the judge to side the way that we would really like them to side.
Thank you. And the first three series, because there's still more that will come out, they're all about motions. Why did you decide to focus on motions, and why 3 books in the series?
Sure. So
motions.
No, thank you. And I'm sorry for interrupting you. So I found that there really wasn't formalized training when I went through the JAG school, and I felt like I was floundering and felt very ineffective when I first started off doing it. And so I felt like, A, there's a need, and B, it's such an important factor in the direction of a case and where it can go. So I started writing the first one just about the mechanics of actually doing it, because I saw that there was a deficit in training, and I felt like it would be very worthwhile to put something into the availability to counsel to be able to give them an actual tool. That first one is really about writing it. But what I see also in practice, and having talked to so many judges, I've appeared now in front of, I think, more than 55 military judges over the course of almost 2 decades. And they often are, frustrated by motions practice and taking and incorporating some of those lessons learned, because you could write a beautiful brief, right? And maybe some of the law schools have done a good job of kind of helping people to create that first written product. But we also see people really stumbling when they go into court to try to litigate them. So I said, okay, I'm going to break it into 2 books. I'm going to, very basics of how to write the motion, the mechanics of it. And now I'm going to give them the tools to know sort of these checklists of how am I going to go into court? How am I going to prove the facts that I need to prove that I didn't already include in my motion? How am I going to prepare for oral argument? How am I going to respond to the other side's brief? To really be, because people are losing motions every day because they didn't put any evidence on. And it keeps happening. They keep being told not to do that, but they're not told how to. Then, the inspiration for the 3rd book really was, okay, I've given them general principles that are good for kind of everyday motions, but the majority of the cases being tried right now, prosecuted and defended in the military, really relate to sexual assault. And the most common motion that we're seeing filed is Rule 412 motions, which governs rape shield law. It's not easy. It's its own very specialized body of law. In the military has definitely a very substantial history in terms of how that rule has been shaped in practice. And so I felt the need to really lay out in that third book, both, it's a combined, both how to write them and how to litigate them. And it's been well received. People are excited that I did it for that, because as they were reading the first two books, they're like, this is all well and good, but what about this one motion that we're filing the majority of? And so I felt like it was definitely where it needed to go next. If I'm being honest, I should write another one about compelling experts, but it's like, I need a break. I need a break from talking about motions. And so that's why I've mapped out the next book to talk about jury instructions and voir dire.
Thank you. And in this book, in these books, you just didn't outline the step-by-step process of drafting, litigating, or presenting your fact. You also give examples. You know, in one of your anecdotes, you talked about filing a motion to have a journal, a therapy journal by a girl to be admitted in the case that you're prosecuting for sexual assault. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that particular case and how what you did helped?
No, thank you. So in conducting our investigation of a very egregious case by a child against her, it was her biological father who had been abusing her for a very long time. She had gotten to some therapy and was journaling as part of that therapy. Certainly when a child has to be able to face their accuser and to undergo the stress of having to recall such traumatic events, you can see sometimes where children freeze and they're just unable to do it. The journals were done for a medical purpose in order to help this child heal from the trauma. And I had done enough research that indicated to me I had a good faith reason to try to admit the journals for their truth. Even though, they're out of court statements, they're considered, everyone, here's hearsay. But there are exceptions and exclusions to hearsay. And I felt like this really met the definition of being for a medical diagnosis or treatment. And so I filed this I think it was probably 25-page motion with, maybe 60 pages of attachments to support it. I had to call the mother of the defendant because it was important in laying the foundation to get this journal in to be able to appreciate that the child at least had some level of why it was that she was journaling, that it wasn't just for fun, that it wasn't, fanciful, that it wasn't made up, that it was being done with a purpose. And so the mom of the defendant actually had to lay part of that foundation for me. I had to also, of course, lay the foundation partly through the child and then finally through the therapist in order to get it in. And once I knew I had that ruling that it was coming in for its truth, I knew that I could secure a conviction, because even if she froze on the stand, I had, for its truth, her outcries and her laying the details of her abuse.
So you were able to get that in and help the case.
Oh, it absolutely did, because even when she testified, there was a certain detail of a certain kind of abuse. I won't get into the details, but that she was not, it was too painful for her to recount on the stand. And I still secured a conviction on that charge because of the journal.
Wow, great job.
Thank you.
And you also emphasize that counsel should present facts as much as possible. Why is that very important?
Sure. It's kind of one of my mantras is help the judge, help you, right? And so the only way to give the judge that ability to be able to draw those conclusions of law is you got to give them the facts. One of my mentors coming up in the Army was a very senior colonel, very highly respected judge. And I remember him, there's all these, the messages of our mentors that we carry with us, and him saying, I know the law, counsel. I need you to tell me the facts. And that was okay. I can someone who takes direction from the tower. If my judge is telling me after this many decades of being on the bench that that's what he needs, that's what I'm going to give him. And so I spend the majority of the time both in the books and just in my own practice, focusing on the facts and proving those facts so that the judge can then apply them in a way that I've hopefully advocated for in an effective manner.
Thank you. And in the books too, you didn't. It's not just about writing the motion. It's not just about presenting the facts in the motion. You also outline or emphasize that counsel should default to asking or requesting for oral arguments. Why is that important? Why not just file the motion and let the judge rule on the written words?
Right. So definitely over the last 2 decades, I have come to realize that even if I think I've written, this masterpiece, even if I've spent hours on it, judges are human. They have very full dockets. They have many tasks ahead of them. And I cannot rely necessarily on this written masterpiece that I've given them, that sometimes there could be a lingering question that remains for them even after I feel like I addressed it enough, that our system is based on humans, the frailty of humans. And so it's important that you're there, and not in every case, but in the majority of them, I teach that you need to be asking for it because maybe that judge didn't read your motion at all. And this is his or her only time when they're actually going to have it in front of them, sort of forced fun. And so if I can be there to make sure that they didn't miss something, or, I always take it on me. And, that's one of the teaching points I give in the book is, even if you think you pounded it on the head, you are respectful and demure in the way that you go about it and say, "Oh, Your Honor, I'm so sorry that I clearly did not address that sufficiently. I thank you so much for this opportunity to do that now." Because you don't want to ever, right? Because of people being human, when you're trying to persuade a human, you don't want to give them a reason to feel like you're being antagonistic or denigrating their esteem in this position. And so you always sort of take this, I didn't do enough. How can I be serving you so that I can always meet the needs of my client?
Thank you. And you dedicated a whole book to one rule, Rule 412. Why that?
So really so I think that it's the most, if I had to, take statistics on it, I think it's probably the most filed and most litigated motion that we see in military practice. That and maybe compelling experts, which is why I've got, that idea to maybe address that, because I have kind of a different take. But it's not an easy area of the law. I know I've consulted on cases where counsel missed the way that they needed to litigate it. And it was a chasm that caused them to not, because in Rule 412, for defense attorneys, it's a rule of exclusion. And so we as the defense have to be very, very compelling in dotting all of the I's and crossing all of the T's and making the connections as to why it's so material to the defense. For instance, I consulted on a case out of Hawaii where a statement made by the alleging victim that night, the judge had ruled that it was not being allowed in. And just from talking to the counsel, it seemed like such a wrong ruling. And I said, well, I can't judge the judge without taking a look. And so they sent me the pleadings, they sent me the transcript, and they had not ever asked their client or put in an affidavit. They hadn't put into evidence why the words that came out of her mouth in that moment, how they affected his belief about their interaction. And the judge is not going to fill in that gap for you. He's not going to imply or infer anything. And I said, you need to file a motion for reconsideration. You need to supply it with this affidavit from your client saying, I heard it, and this is how it affected my mindset as to how, our interaction that we had. Evidence came in, right? So sometimes there are these big, major catastrophes that can happen in a case where, the counsel had good intentions, but fell short in some way. And so I'm trying to be very intentional and purposeful about process it and keeping them to their process so that they won't have those kinds of lackings, right? They shouldn't have to pay to consult with me to get these motions in, to get this evidence in. They should, buy a $20 book and hopefully they'll save their client, years in jail. It's a bargain. It's a bargain.
It is. It is. And since you've been in private practice, what are the typical cases that you normally handle?
So I would say that for the majority of my practice, it has been cases of allegations of adult sexual assault, whether penetrative or a touching. That has really been the bulk of my practice and kind of, I would say probably where I've made the reputation that I have. I would say that more recently I'm feeling drawn to other types of cases because for me, in addition to connecting with the person whose story that I get to tell, I also seek out cases where there's a nuance or something that's a new challenge that I would not have had. For example, I took a case in Germany because it was the first case I had seen or heard of in over a decade where the defense was involuntary intoxication. And it's so rare in the practice that the military does not even have a standard jury instruction for it. And I drafted it. The judge accepted it. And I think will be incorporated into future iterations of the standard instructions that are just on the books for the military. It was such an innovation and a fun case in that way. I know obviously it's a person's life and you definitely always feel drawn to that and needing to respect that and be gracious in that way. But I also had the chance, I found case law to support, and I wrote, I think, a 35-page motion about why, even though my client had put his hands on a woman's throat in strangling her, and that was a charge, that why we were validly able to get a self-defense instruction. And I filed it as a motion. The judge took it under advisement. I think the government really brushed it off because it sounds ludicrous, right? My client is strangling a woman. How could he possibly be in self-defense? But it was because she had drugged him and he was trying to find out what she had done to him. And he was using the amount of force necessary in order to try to gain that information. And the judge gave us the instruction. And that had never been done before. And so I'm looking for ways that stretch me as an advocate that are kind of tip of the spear, things that are new, things that are innovating, because I don't want to stagnate. I always want to be growing.
Thank you. And are you limited to where you can represent clients? Do you have a particular jurisdiction, or you could represent clients from anywhere within the U.S.?
So I can even actually represent people anywhere on any base, on any installation worldwide, because the military's requirement for practice is that I am licensed and in good standing and approved by the highest court of any state. So I have a license in Louisiana that's still valid. I also now have a license in Washington State, where I reside and where I do the majority of my cases. But I've represented clients in Japan, in Korea, in Germany, in Italy, the Middle East, because it's considered essentially a federal jurisdiction, but we don't have a separate licensure required. We don't have a separate bar. It's merely that we are licensed in good standing in a state.
Okay. And for those clients who are, let's say, in Japan or Germany, do you have to travel there to represent them, or can you do that virtually?
So for many, many years, and obviously before the world changed post-COVID, I was circling the globe. And I remember multiple Januaries. It's always the busiest for us, but multiple Januaries where I had flown more than 50,000 miles in the month of January alone. Because of my deep commitment to my 4 children and the restructuring of my family into being a single mom, I no longer am taking travel cases. So I have a team of people who will do the travel cases, and they're zigzagging the world on behalf of our clients. But I also have for administrative hearings where they're trying to fire people, I have agreed to take some of those on from a distance if the client consents and feels like it won't be a barrier to my messaging. And so I've represented some clients more recently from overseas virtually. It makes for an interesting body clock because you've got to be ready when everybody in Japan is waking, you're like it's the middle of the night for you. So, but yeah, I've been able to do that and had the flexibility to do it. I think the world is more open to it now, given the changes that we saw across the legal landscape.
Yes, please. And do you also represent veterans?
So we do. A lot of times people leave the service not under the circumstances that they might have wished for. Maybe their discharge was not characterized in a way that they feel appropriately captures their service. And so we help to correct military records. We help to try to upgrade discharges, often because there has a tie and a link to what that veteran can obtain in terms of assistance afterward and, VA claims, filing their VA claim, trying to obtain medical help after their service, especially for things, like PTSD and trauma, and trying to make them whole. And so we do help veterans when those issues arise.
Okay. And just recently, I don't know how recent I can call recently, but within the past few months, you joined TikTok and you've become a TikTok sensation. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I have, and I've kind of been reluctant for a while. I had a very close friend try to tell me, you need to be on there. You'll just be doing so much good for people. I really feel like you should do it. And really shying away from it, I had this idea that the community that was there were not people that I would call my target market. And so I didn't really believe that it was a viable source. I've been wrong. So one of my good friends who does legal marketing has his own YouTube channel, and my brain doesn't stop if you can't tell, but I was on a Peloton doing like an hour-long endurance ride and not really being enamored with, what was in front of me. And I said, okay, I've got my phone here. I'm going to go to my friend's YouTube page and I'm going to watch this video about how to start on TikTok. I'm at least curious. And I watched this video and he gave a process for, how to do the research, how to create this spreadsheet so that you can figure out how other people in your space are being successful in it, the people at the top of it. And I assigned that task to rewatch it to my senior paralegal. And I said, let's do the legwork on this. Let's see what we can do. And what we learned was that there's nobody really in the space. There was maybe two other attorneys who had done any content at all. And it was only one or two. And they were very, kind of in these uptight suits and just sort of like lawyering on TikTok. This is what you should do if you were, ever in this situation. And that's the kind of stuff that people just scroll past. It feels like there's not a connection, right? And so I have connected with the community. As of today, I think I've hit, in the last just over 3 months, I've hit 62,000 followers, which feels great. And over 3.1 million views of my content and my unique hashtag. I'm learning all this language and all of these very interesting part of this world and this culture. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful to them. Honestly, it has been so rewarding to be able to share my stories. So I talk very anonymously about cases I've tried. And one of the things that I think I realize about military culture is we are a storytelling community. You get a couple of us together, we're going to BS about this, that, and the other. And, oh man, this happened to me. Oh, I saw that once, and we're just very animated about sharing our stories. And people have really connected with it and really shown an interest. And it's been really fun.
Wow, congratulations. Because I remember when you were just below 10,000 followers
when I was reaching to hit 1,000, right? I was trying to hit 1,000 because then you can go live. You know, TikTok has this series of incentives for as you gain more followership, you get more bells and whistles and more things you can do. And it was a stretch. I had that, I think it was my first month trying to get to 1,000. And now I'm 3 months in, I'm at almost 62,000. So.
Wow, congratulations. And how or where can people get your books?
So a couple of places. If they want to get them the fastest, I'm available on Amazon. Just Google my name as the author. Then you also, if you want to get on my website and you would rather have a hand-signed copy, then you can go on the website and it's under the /STB, as in shaping the battlefield. That's located on the website as well.
STB.com?
It's ucmjdefender.com /STB. That's where the Shaping the Battlefield books are.
All right. Thank you. And it's been wonderful talking to you for the past hour. I thank you for your candor. I thank you for your honesty. And I thank you for educating our audience. Thank you for coming on to Legal Angle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And for those of you listening or watching us at home, we thank you for your time. Until next time, stay safe, stay blessed. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube, and on Facebook. Bye for now.